You're listening to the Sex and Psychology Podcast, the sex ed you never got in school and won't get anywhere else. I am your host, Dr. Justin Lehmiller. I am a social psychologist and research fellow at the Kinsey Institute and author of the book, Tell Me What You Want, The Science of Sexual Desire and How It Can Help You Improve Your Sex Life. Knowing that someone loves you is one thing. Actually feeling that love inside your body and in everyday life is something else entirely. And that's where a heck of a lot of relationships get stuck. The love is there, but we're not feeling it. In this episode, we're going to explore the practical skills that can open us up to feeling and experiencing more love in our lives. Specifically, we'll cover 5 research-backed mindsets that make it easier for us to feel loved and deeply connected. I am joined once again by Sonia Lubomirsky, a distinguished professor of psychology at the University of California, Riverside, and author of the best-selling books, The How of Happiness and The Myths of Happiness. Her latest book, co-authored with Dr. Harry Reese, is titled How to Feel Loved, the 5 mindsets that will get you more of what matters most. This is going to be another fascinating conversation that will help you learn to listen in a way that deepens intimacy and create the kind of responsiveness that keeps love and desire alive. Stick around because we're diving in right after the break. If you love the science of sex as much as I do, consider becoming a friend of the Kinsey Institute at Indiana University. The Kinsey Institute is the world's premier research organization on sex and relationships, and you can help them continue the legacy of Dr. Alfred Kinsey, whose pioneering research changed everything we think we know about sex. Visit kinseyinstitute.org to make an impact. Your donations can help support ongoing research projects on critical topics. You can also show your support by following Kinsey Institute on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you for supporting sex science. Okay, Sonia, in the last episode, we talked all about why love often doesn't land and how there can be all these other people in our lives who love us, yet we don't feel it. So let's talk about how we can open ourselves up to feeling loved. In your book, you introduce a concept called the relationship seesaw, which is a metaphor for how 2 people kind of take turns lifting each other into view. So can you walk us through how this seesaw actually works in everyday relationships? What does it look like in practice to be on the seesaw?
So this idea, and we talked about this in the last episode, that like mostly we're really only showing kind of the top part or one part of ourselves to the other person. So you can think about it as like yourself, like you're submerged in water. That's why we called it the seesaw, by the way, spelled S-E-A, like the sea. So yeah, maybe only the tip of me is showing, and then much more of my full self is sort of under the water, and other people can't see it. I mean, another way to think about it is like we all have these sort of walls around us. And by the way, when you think about it, it's really true. Like we're all kind of walking around with these walls around us, or we're sort of submerged. And this idea is like, how do we get, and we really start with getting the other person to lift them a little bit up out of the water or whatever, so they can share and we can see more of their sort of full self. I don't usually use the word true self because it's sort of not clear if there's such a thing as a true self, because everything is part of our true self. So kind of a little bit counterintuitively, if I want to feel more loved, say by my colleague, really the first step is try to make them feel more loved first. And I start with showing sort of genuine curiosity in them, in their inner life. And it's so wonderful and compelling when that happens. I mean, think about it. When was the last time, say you were at a party or, gathering, and someone was so curious for you to tell your story, right? They're leaning in and their eyes are bright and they just can't wait for you to finish your story, right? It doesn't happen very often. It's rare. It's so compelling and you can't fake it. When I'm genuinely curious, say in that colleague or in that friend, then it helps them, like it gives them a sense of safety and trust, and they'll want to sort of open up a little bit more. So when I'm really curious, I'm kind of lifting them up a little bit out of the water, they're more of their full self, and then they're more likely to share. And that we call that the sharing mindset, which is sort of being a little bit more vulnerable, sort of showing more of your full self. Doesn't have to be revealing your traumas or secrets, because pacing is really important, right? If you share too much, then we're going to just kind of go right back up again. So I'm showing curiosity in you, and then it helps you to sort of, motivates you to share more of yourself. And then I'm really listening when you're sharing your story. Like I'm really genuinely listening. Usually most of us are not good listeners. You're probably trained to be a good listener, right? But most of us are not good, including me. We mostly, what we say in the book, we mostly listen to respond. We're rehearsing our answer, while the other person is talking, like passing the mic to back and forth. And what we recommend is try to listen to learn, right? Listen like you're going to be quizzed on it the next day. And that's what listening workshops actually literally do, is they have you listen and then spit out exactly what the other person said. So you have to listen really carefully. So you're telling your story, I'm truly listening. And then you feel even more like ready and willing to sort of share more of your story. And that's how it starts. And then so I'm lifting you out of the water. But then the idea is that you reciprocate. And reciprocity is actually one of the strongest sort of findings in my field, social psychology. It's very powerful, right? It's very hard not to reciprocate. Some people don't, but it's very hard not to. So the idea is that you will then reciprocate, and then you will show curiosity in me. And then I'll be like motivated to tell my story. And then you'll really listen. Those are only 3 of the mindsets. And when we listen to each other, we listen with warmth and care. And this idea that I want you to be happy. So that's that. And we also, what if you reveal something that's sort of not so positive to me? I also kind of listen with acceptance and sort of this feeling like, yes, we're all complex human beings and we all have positive and negative qualities. So I know we'll sort of talk about all these little aspects in a minute, but that's kind of how it starts.
Yeah, I like this idea, this metaphor that we're kind of all walking around in the water and we can only see like the top of the other person. And, the only way that you can get to know them or see more is if you kind of give them a floaty and, more of them pops up out of the water and then they stand out and you're starting to know them on a deeper level that you otherwise wouldn't. And so, yeah, it's a helpful way of kind of making sense for the way that we're kind of navigating through the world. And so many of us never give out a floaty to someone else and we're just kind of operating at this very superficial level and we're only ever seeing the tip of that other person and not getting to know them any deeper. And that's at the core of why so many of us don't feel loved, is because we're not making those deeper connections. So you mentioned that there are these 5 mindsets that we can try, and you talked a little bit about some of them. So let's dive a little bit deeper into each one. And the first one is the sharing mindset, which is the idea that feeling loved requires that we're going to reveal our real, complicated, messy selves, not just the highlight reel. But people often worry about oversharing or being too much, or TMI. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about, as a social psychologist, how do we practice healthy self-disclosure where we're sharing, quote unquote, the right amount of information at the right time and not too much too soon? Like, how do we do this?
I know exactly. This is actually really hard, and it's hard to teach, because it involves emotional intelligence. And I kind of wish that every high school and college had classes in emotional intelligence, although it's really hard. You have to read the room. You have to read the other person. You have to gauge, for example, before you share, you need to gauge the other person's curiosity. Are they really interested in you? And really, starting small is the way to go, I think. Sort of start small or start sort of, so instead of saying, I'm fine today, maybe you say, oh, I've had a rough day today. And then you sort of gauge their reaction. Are they interested in hearing more? And then maybe say a little bit more. So it's really more about kind of going slowly, pacing, and always sort of being attuned to the other person's reaction. Again, what happens in sex, right? It's sort of attunement. It's hard for a lot of us, maybe many of us, it's hard. It sort of involves practice. So maybe that's what we should all do, kind of sort of practice that kind of sharing a little bit and a little bit more. Because you're right, if you overshare right away, then everyone's walls will come kind of right back up again. So that's going to backfire. So yeah, it's not easy, but it's so important that I think it's really important to sort of learn to share more.
Yeah. And my advice on this would be the same as the advice that I give when it comes to sharing sexual fantasies, which is to kind of start low and go slow. You don't necessarily want to come out and share your wildest, most adventurous, kinkiest sexual fantasy of all time right away, right? That might be too much too soon, except for, the most adventurous among us, right? So it might be better to start at kind of the tamer end of the spectrum and share something that's maybe not quite as extreme or intense, and then take turns going back and forth sharing things and see how your partner responds, because self-disclosure works best when it is reciprocal and when it kind of takes baby steps. We know this from Art Aaron's research on, how to create fast friends in the lab, is that the way that we do this is just through giving people these structured exercises where they ask a progressive series of questions that becomes emotionally deeper over time. And you take turns going back and forth answering them. And you can actually generate a heck of a lot of intimacy in a really short period of time when you do something like this. And so I think that exercise, the so-called 50 questions that lead to love, can be a helpful framework for figuring out what to disclose and when and what is too much too soon.
Absolutely. And people can actually use those questions that are errand questions, or we talk about that in the book. And there's also lots of like question card decks. They become really popular. My favorite, this is, I don't make money from these, but like my favorite are called the and. I think they're really great questions. And again, they sort of increase in intimacy. So actually, I know couples who use them, actually like have bought these card decks. And I have one friend who like actually printed out a bunch of questions and like brought them to dates. I mean, I laugh in a positive way. Like, I think that's wonderful. So it's your sharing, but also in terms of the other person sharing, you also don't want to, ask them two personal questions all at once, because the walls might just go right back up. So you ask them the question, sort of see how they respond, gauge if they want to respond a little bit more. But the asking questions, I think, is so important, something we don't really talk about as much. Because like with listening, for example, people will listen and actually talk to like one of the world's listening experts a couple of years ago. His name is Avi Kluger in Israel. And he said, well, can we do a listening exercise? So I sat with him and he asked me a fairly personal question. And he seemed like he was a great listener. He was really like, he was looking like he was listening and he was nodding and doing all those right. And I just thought, okay, that's great. But I'm like, you need to say something. Like, you need to ask me questions, or you need to share a little bit. It was just too much. Like, anyway, the asking the questions is really important. So ask more. That's one of my biggest advice. Ask more questions. People want to be asked.
Totally agree. This just has me thinking about how when I go out to like a bar or something and I see a lot of people who I know, a lot of those folks, it's only going to be very superficial conversation. They're going to ask, how are you? But they don't really care, right? They're just asking it because it's kind of the same as saying hi, hello. And, they don't really necessarily want it to go further or deeper than that. But then on the other hand, given that a lot of people know what I do for a living, I have a lot of folks who will come up to me, even people I don't know at all, who suddenly start sharing the most intimate details of their sex lives and are asking me for my take on it. And it's like, holy shit, like, where's the middle ground here where, it's a little more than superficial, but maybe not like, let's talk about the last time you had sex. But
and also, it's really not about you. It's really more about like your expertise. So that's not really forging a connection in some way. I have two examples. One is when you think about like your work life, say I have like my colleagues, I love my colleagues, and, I go to work, I go to the office, and, most of my colleagues, don't ask me like really personal questions. In fact, pretty much no one does. And that's actually appropriate. Like, you think of the professional environment, it's appropriate for them not to sort of ask really personal questions or even medium personal questions. And that's probably true in a lot of workplaces, but we think about it like, and I just assume, they probably aren't asking because they think it's not appropriate, but you could also assume maybe they don't care. Maybe they really don't care about my inner life or like what's going on with me. And I know they do, but it just sort of makes you think, like, again, like that asking questions show care. Like, it really shows, it's like a profound gesture of like caring, right? And warmth and believing in you and sort of accepting you. Another example I had is I went on a date once, well, more than once I had this experience where the guy just like will talk the whole time. I mean, I'm sure women do this too. And again, what we were talking about before, like when we first meet each other, we want to impress, right? We want to show that. And the guy actually is a storyteller. He has a huge TikTok following. I mean, he's great at stories. And so he just kept telling stories. And I finally interrupted him and I said, do you realize in the last 45 minutes, you have not asked me a single question? Now, it's a risky thing to say. I just felt comfortable saying it. I've said that sometimes and it's really like it ended the date, and that's fine. Like, I don't really want to go out with that person. But he responded actually really beautifully. And he was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. When I get nervous, I just talk. Like, I fall back on my storytelling skills. And that really forges a connection, right? So it's kind of broke the fourth wall. So I don't necessarily recommend saying something like that, but it works.
Yeah, I can see how that would work. But I could also see how it could lead the conversation to either end or take it to the next level. So the second mindset is listening to learn, which is very different from the way a lot of us listen when we're having, say, an argument with our spouse or partner, which is we're listening to defend our position, or we're listening to figure out what we need to do to fix our partner, or we're listening because we need to know what they're saying so that we can, quote unquote, win the argument, right? So listening to learn is a different way of approaching listening. So what are the key ingredients of it? How do we do this? And how can this help lead to more productive conversations around conflict areas in relationships?
But it's so hard. It takes so much effort. And again, I'm really more of a talker than listener. So one thing is you want to approach your next conversation in like the role of a listener, like sort of take on the role, like you say to yourself, I'm going to be the listener in that conversation. So that's maybe one way to kind of put on that hat or put on that coat. Well, there's lots of research on what's called high quality listening. And there's really three features. And one is just simply attention, right? So you're really attending to what a person is saying. The second is comprehension. So you're like not just attending, right? You really need to kind of integrate and understand what they're saying. And you probably know, like in therapy, there's various exercise techniques where you kind of repeat what the other person said to make sure that you're really comprehending. And the third actually is maybe not as intuitive, and that's sort of positive intent, is that you wish them to be well, like you have a positive intent. So you're not just trying to win. And that's so hard. But I think like again, like anything, it involves practice, right? If you want to become a better basketball player, just like play basketball every day. And same thing with this. And so we actually are about to do some studies with couples, but also with friendship pairs, where we're going to ask them to listen better. Like maybe during your next 3 conversations this week, be that listener, and we give them instructions for how to do that. And we're also going to look at not just like psychological effects of that, but genomic effects. We're going to take their blood and see how it affects their immune system. And so, yeah, pretty excited about that. Because I think listening is not only good for the other person, obviously they're benefiting, but also it benefits you, the listener, too.
Are you tired of navigating the confusing and, let's be honest, sketchy world of libido supplements? You're not alone. There are tons of libido products on the market that make big promises, but finding one that actually lives up to the hype is a tall order because many of the options out there contain questionable ingredients or they're underdosed or ineffective. But what if there was a libido booster you could actually trust? Let me introduce you to Drive Boost from VB Health. VB Health has a simple mission, creating supplements that work. Their formula isn't a mystery. It's doctor-formulated, third-party tested for purity and potency, and proudly made here in the USA. And here's something else that makes Drive Boost unique. It's designed for men and women alike. So if you're ready to ditch the shady stuff and choose a libido supplement that's effective and that you can feel confident about, it's time to check out Drive Boost. Learn more and get yours at vb.health. Visit vb.health and use code Justin for 10% off, or click the link in the show notes. February is such a good reminder to slow down and ask, how am I actually taking care of myself right now? For me, a big part of that is creating little moments at home that just feel comforting. And that's why I've really come to love Cozy Earth. Their bamboo pajama set is one of those upgrades that you notice immediately. It's unbelievably soft, lightweight, and breathable, so you stay cozy without overeating. Slipping into them at night makes it easier for me to unwind and fall asleep. You also have to check out their classic cuddle blanket, which is perfect for long evenings on the couch when you just want to indulge in comfort. It's plush, has just the right amount of weight, and once you wrap yourself in it, maybe with your special someone too, you'll wonder where this blanket has been your whole life. What really sets Cozy Earth apart is their quality. These pieces are thoughtfully made, designed to last, and meant to elevate everyday moments. They offer hassle-free returns if you don't love your purchase, plus a 10-year warranty, because once you feel this kind of comfort, you'll want it to last a decade. So if you're looking to show yourself or someone you care about a little extra love this month, head to cozyearth.com and use my code Justin for up to 20% off. And if you get a post-purchase survey, be sure to mention that you heard about Cozy Earth right here. Celebrate everyday love with comfort that makes the little moments count. Maybe a good way to think about this idea of listening to learn is to approach it as if you're a podcast host, right? Which is a very different way of approaching a situation with someone else. Because in this case, you're not listening to try and win an argument, defend your position. You're a podcast host. Your goal is to get the other person's point of view out there, to understand what it is that they're saying, to ask probing follow-up questions, to make sure that you're getting at it at this deeper level that you really need to really truly understand what's going on there. And so, maybe that's just a helpful reframe when you're in one of those situations where it's really important for you to listen, to learn, to understand this other person's perspective, is say, hey, I'm going to play podcast host here for a little bit.
I love that. So I just wrote that down. And I was thinking, because I'm doing podcasts, to promote my book, podcasts are going to totally understand the listening to learn mindset. Actually, if we can jump ahead to curiosity, right? So really you need to be curious about, starting with being a podcast. If you're not curious, then you're not going to be a very good podcast host. If you're not, you really need to be curious. And so what's the difference, by the way, between good listening and curiosity? One way I think about it is imagine you're in college and you're listening to a lecture. I mean, you could be a great listener to that lecture, right? You're taking notes, great notes. You get an A plus on the test about the lecture, but maybe you're totally not curious about it. Maybe you really don't care. You're just listening because you want to get an A. So you can be a good listener without actually having curiosity. And again, curiosity is something really hard. Maybe a good actor can fake it, but you really can't fake it. And getting back to the conflict conversation with your, say, romantic partner or anyone, that's really hard in the middle of the conversation. Let's say they're yelling and you're just like, stop and think with curiosity. Like, wow, like why you're curious, like why are they so angry? Like really be curious. That's challenging, but I think it can be done, right? And I think that could really help that conflict discussion.
Yeah, I think you're so right that the curiosity and the listening part, they go hand in hand. They feed into one another, because it's one thing to just listen and absorb like a sponge. It's another to actually be curious and to go the next step and to ask the follow-up questions and make sure that you really understand this and that this person's point of view gets out there so that you can, especially in a conflict conversation, resolve that in some type of productive way. So the first three steps here are the sharing mindset, listening to learn, radical curiosity. But you say that those in and of themselves, while they're great, aren't necessarily enough if you don't also have an open heart mindset, which involves approaching the other person with compassion instead of scorekeeping. I think this is an especially important mindset around something like sex, where rejection can often feel very personal, and it often leads people to start keeping score. Like, this is the number of times that you've turned down my attempts to initiate sex, right? So how do we avoid that tendency to start keeping score when it seems like our partner isn't on the same page with us, and instead kind of keep that open heart mindset and respond and act with compassion instead of assuming the worst?
Yeah. And I want to return to the sexual behavior because there's such an emotional sting to it, right? I was just talking to a friend who like literally left his wife because she kept rejecting, his sexual initiations. And he's like, it's so painful. Like, even though he knows she loves him, right? So the open heart, by the way, mindset is basically an approach and a perspective, like to another person, or an attitude to another person or to a situation. The open heart mindset, right? You have sort of care and compassion and warmth and really a belief in that person. You want them to be well, you want them to be happy. So one way to think about it is like most relationships, not just romantic, but other, probably have the open heart mindset, that you can argue like you probably wouldn't be in that relationship if you didn't have an open heart. It's like it's necessary, if not sufficient, right? But we often have the open heart, we have the warmth, the compassion, but we don't have the other mindsets. In fact, one of the surprises of our book is that we gave it out to a few early readers, and two different they happen to be male friends told us that they broke up with their girlfriends after reading our book. We were really surprised at that, and because they ended up using it more of as a diagnostic than more as opposed to sort of advice. And so they did have the open heart, right? They loved each other. But one person said, I realized after reading your book that my girlfriend really wasn't sharing. And I wasn't sharing to her. And the other person said, she stopped being curious about my work. That's a really important one. But anyway, but the open heart often does exist, but it's not sufficient. I'm just thinking, again, getting back to your question about sex, that's so interesting. So you're really challenging me here because this is a space that I'm not, as familiar. I mean, as like, I don't do research in it, because I can imagine really feeling warmth and love, but then the person still rejects me. And then maybe you interpret it as like, well, that means they truly love me. Like, why are they rejecting? They truly love me. Can you answer that as the expert?
So I was thinking about a couple of things here. One is that I've seen some research looking at sexual afterglow. After we have sex with a partner, we feel happier and we get this post-sex bump in happiness that lasts for 2 days on average. But in the same research, they've also looked at the effects of sexual rejection, and they find that there is an even longer lingering after effect of your partner turning down your request for sex, right? That actually lasts for 3 days on average. And so the rejection feels real and is often felt very intensely around sex. And so you might know on some level that your partner loves you, but when they turn down sex, and sex is a way that you have primarily come to associate with love, or it's the way that you feel love the most strongly, that's your love language, it is something that can become a big sticking point in relationships if you have this consistent pattern that emerges where one partner is always initiating and the other partner is always turning down.
I wrote down that finding. That's so interesting. Another friend told me recently that the way he feels loved is when his wife touches him, even just a little touch, right? Like, so yeah, so that's obviously to that person, that's their love language. So getting back to the mindsets though, I would say to have the conversation, it's so hard to communicate around that. Like, so you've been rejected, then to then actually have a conversation about that. But like to have that sort of sharing, listening, curiosity and multiplicity, which we'll get to in a second, sort of accepting that person. I would hope that that would help to sort of really be curious about what's going on with the other person. Because I'm also sort of putting my head into the person who's doing the rejecting, and how they might just not have that sexual desire. And they love the person, they just don't, for lots of reasons, very complicated reasons we know from books and research, and the guilt that they feel that they're causing their partner 3 days of whatever the opposite of afterglow is, after
rejection, I guess. I don't know.
No,
I don't know what the term is.
Glow, right? After dim. So yeah, it's hard on the other person too, because they're probably feeling guilty. So complicated.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where if we approach this situation with this open heart, with this compassion, that means that for the person who's turning down the request for sex, that they think about it from their partner's perspective. And maybe it's not just a no that they're providing, but it's I'm not in the mood for sex right now, but would you be down to cuddle? Or, I'm not in the mood for sex right now, but can we do it this weekend? Or, it's proposing an alternative so that it doesn't feel like you're shutting off all future opportunities for sex, and it doesn't, feel so personal. But also for the person who's being rejected or turned down, maybe it's also giving your partner the benefit of the doubt and saying, hey, maybe they're going through a lot right now and they're really stressed, and we're not going to have sex right now, but we'll try it again some other time when it works for both of us.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion.
So finally, we have the multiplicity mindset, which reminds us that, people are multifaceted and changing. And, people in relationships often reduce one another to these kind of one-dimensional labels, like they're the shy one or you're the needy one, right? But what's the problem with those sort of fixed identities in terms of, our ability to feel loved? Why is it important for us to see each other in more expansive, generous ways?
I was thinking actually this morning that like the opposite of multiplicity mindset is like a judgmental mindset. And I think we're all judgmental some of the time. And maybe it even serves us well sometimes because we, I don't know, again, I'm always thinking about evolutionary sort of adaptive reasons for it. We like see someone do something bad and we like say, oh, maybe that's not a person that we should be connected with. But the idea of multiplicity, and actually it comes from trauma research, that this idea that if you have a trauma, it doesn't define you, right? It's like we're all a quilt of many, many, both positive and negative qualities. So I'm kind sometimes, but sometimes I'm selfish. And sometimes I'm loyal and sometimes I'm narcissistic. And we're all like that. Like my latest pet peeve, I don't know if you noticed, but everyone's ex is a narcissist. Like everyone's ex is a narcissist. I don't know how that happened. And yet it's a spectrum, right? We're all on the spectrum. And to sort of really accept that. Now, accepting someone's negative qualities doesn't necessarily mean that you want to hang out with them. So that's another thing. So sometimes you might accept it, but realize, that, yeah, I just can't, handle that all the time. Of course, if it's a child, a romantic partner, that's a different story. So again, sort of really accepting it. And we have a really hard time with it. I feel like, I don't know, for me, like as I get older, it's been easier for me to be less judgmental because people talk all the time, right? Like I might have a friend say like, oh, can you believe like what that guy did, right? So here's an example. A guy friend said something pretty awful to a woman friend. And my friends are like, oh my God, you can't believe what he did. And my immediate reaction was like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm so upset. But then, using the multiplicity mindset, I saw in this guy kind of the little boy inside of him. I saw, or the teenager who used to be rejected by girls. And I could just see why somehow this woman triggered something that triggered that little boy inside of him, or that teenager inside of him. Now, again, it doesn't excuse it, but it definitely helped me sort of understand his behavior, put it in this larger context. So I feel like I and lots of people I know are kind of doing that more and more. I think it's really important.
Yeah, what you were saying has me thinking about attachment style and how, if you think about somebody who is anxiously attached, like people often try and reduce them to a stereotype that they're just super needy and clingy and view it through this very negative lens. But there are also positive traits and qualities associated with anxious attachment. And, they can also love and show love more intensely, for example. And, the same thing goes for avoidant attachment. It's easy to look at somebody who's avoidantly attached and say that they're distant or cold, but you can also look at it through, another lens where maybe they're good at compartmentalizing things, right? And don't get emotionally hijacked so easily, and how that can be adaptive. And so there are different ways of looking at any given individual, and we're all this constellation, this mix of positive and negative qualities. And, we need to hold space for all of that, because you're not going to find somebody who's just going to have great qualities and never has any bad ones.
Exactly. And this is actually a beautiful example with attachment styles. My lab is about to start a study, which we're calling the partner acceptance study, sort of how to help people accept their partner more. Again, with the caveat, we're not talking about like abusive relationships. And so we're having people think about a quality of their partner that really like bothers them sometimes, or maybe even sometimes they want to walk away. And then one manipulation is exactly what you said, is sort of think about like another quality that sort of correlates with it. So let's say your partner is sort of a workaholic and they often like, maybe they neglect you, because they're going to work too hard. And then you just think about, well, what is correlated with that? Maybe they're like really conscientious. Maybe they're a really great provider. They're giving you kind of a good life to live because they're a workaholic. So it often correlates with other things. Or maybe, and I had an example, I had a partner who would not text, quick enough, or would be often late. And what correlated with that is that he was really present with people in his life. He was so present that he would then, like sort of not text me back or not, be late for our meeting. And so that was a beautiful quality, right? So often it's like a pair, like the bad quality comes correlated with the good quality.
Yeah, in relationships, we got to accept the good with the bad. So thank you so much for this amazing conversation, Sonia. It was really a pleasure to have you here. Can you please tell my listeners where they can go to learn more about you and your work and get a copy of your new book?
My book is called How to Feel Loved with Harry Reese, and it's just howtofeelloved.com. So howtofeelloved.com is the website. Everything's there. By the way, we have a quiz where people can take a quiz where they find out what are their strongest mindset, what's their weakest mindset. That's on that website. So howtofeelloved.com. Thank you.
Great. And I'll be sure to include links to that in the show notes. So thank you again so much for your time. I really appreciate having you here. Thank you for listening. To keep up with new episodes of this podcast, visit my website, Sex and Psychology, at sexandpsychology.com, or subscribe on your favorite platform, where I hope you'll take a moment to rate and review the show. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, please consider becoming a Sex and Psychology Premium subscriber to enjoy ad-free listening for just $3.99 a month. You can also follow me on social media for daily sex research updates. I'm on Blue Sky and X at Justin Lehmiller and Instagram at Justin J. Lehmiller. Also, be sure to check out my book, Tell Me What You Want. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.